Hello, this is Clayton Witt, making a video for the discussion board 3 for American Revolution. And for this week, we were tasked with actually taking a public history site, historic site from the Revolutionary period, and talk about its significance and also talk about kind of the story that was crafted at these sites and the way that these sites approach history. And so I chose to take a look at Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's main home. And obviously, I am not at Monticello. I was not able to go and do an on-site video, unfortunately. But I have been to Monticello, and it is one of my favorite sites, I think, in the state of Virginia. And really just there's a lot of things on the site itself. Obviously there's individual museums talking about Jefferson in the context of the American Revolution. In recent years there have been kind of a renovation of the slave quarters that have been there, and so visitors can look at and see a little bit more about the story of the slaves that were on at the plantation. And then of course there's the Jefferson graveyard that's there as well. But obviously the main attraction there is the building itself, and that's really what I kind of wanted to focus on in this kind of discussion board video. And so just a little bit about the video, or about the building itself. It was originally built built in 1768, which is a little bit prior to the Revolution. That's notably known as the first Monticello. And Jefferson lived there starting in 1770. And after the Revolution, in the 1780s, specifically 1784, when Jefferson became the American foreign minister to France, and Jefferson goes over to Europe, he ends up seeing a lot of the different architectural marvels in European cities, particularly in France. And ends up bringing that back with him and decides to renovate the home further into more of a neoclassical style, more resembling the architectural trends of France, or in Europe in general. And so that's what you see today is the kind of the columns themselves, as well as the dome that is featured there. It's all built in a specific neoclassical style. And so that's a little bit about the building itself. Going a little bit further about kind of the direction that the building has taken and the object of preservation, restoration there. This little excerpt is taken from the site for Virginia national parks, or state parks, I should say. And it says, no other home in the United States more accurately reflects the personality of its owner than Monticello. Monticello is the autobiographical masterpiece of Thomas Jefferson. And that's really kind of the focus of Monticello, and particularly the focus of preservation work there, is that this was a home that was made specifically to the specifications of Thomas Jefferson, and those who are holding on to it now and doing a lot of the restoration efforts take that as their vision to craft to restore whatever needs to be restored to the specifications of Jefferson. And so this requires a lot of research, a lot of primary source material, and really a lot of looking into how exactly this home was built and constructed during the time period. And so that is very much the direction that the owners of the park actually go in. That's the direction that they go in. And talking a little bit more about that restoration history, a major restoration actually occurred in the 1950s, particularly in 1954. And this is just an article from Popular Mechanics from that time period. And the Jefferson Foundation, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, actually purchased the site in 1923 and began renovations on it in the 50s. And there was a lot of issues with the building during the 50s, particularly some of the areas. One of the events that occurred prior to the renovations was that one of the bedrooms on the second floor ended up falling into the basement because the wood was so rotted, and so there was obviously a push that this needed to be renovated in some way. And so one of the main architects was Milton L. Grigg, who was the man who was envisioned to craft it. And he said that his direction was particularly to, quote, preserve rather than restore, and restore rather than reconstruct. And so that's kind of what his idea was. And so you preserve what is already there, what doesn't need to be renovated, preserve that. But what needs to be renovated and what needs to be restored, you don't reconstruct it out of something that you envision it to be. You reconstruct that, you restore it based on the way that Jefferson and his builders envisioned it. And so that is really, again, the direction that the Monticello restorations have been. And it is meant to be, the building itself is meant to be a reflection of Jefferson. And if you've ever been to Monticello, you walk into the building and you walk into the main building, and it definitely is a reflection of Thomas Jefferson. Everything in there is painstakingly made and crafted to be exactly as Jefferson would have seen it. And so there's a sense that the man, Jefferson, cannot be subtracted from the building itself. And so talking a little bit more about that, we have another article in the Sociological Quarterly by two authors, James L. Nolan Jr. and Ty F. Buckman. The title of the article calling Preserving the Postmodern, Restoring the Past, The Cases of Monticello and Montpellier. I'm probably pronouncing Montpellier wrong, I always do. But that's James Madison's home, which is actually very close proximity to Monticello. But the authors of this article find an interesting comparison, an interesting difference between the restoration efforts of Monticello and the restoration efforts of Montpellier. And so, just talking a little bit about that, they say, quote, Monticello looks simultaneously old and new, the product of painstaking and costly restoration, so that, for example, the new roof is as close as possible to the old. It has a perfection that Jefferson himself might have envisioned, but probably never saw. Montpellier, by contrast, conveys the sense of its ambitious but somewhat idiosyncratic series of owners. Madison would not likely recognize the structure that has grown up around his original dwelling. Further, they say, again, talking more about Monticello and Montpellier, they say Monticello has been in the hands of well-funded restorationists whose task has been to bring the property back as nearly as possible to the way it appeared when Jefferson lived in it. Entering public life much later, Montpellier, by contrast, has been the object of a radicalized preservation rather than the more traditional restoration, so that the story of its later owners is told alongside of, and in a few cases on top of, Madison's own. So in this case, Madison's home is more just about the building, keeping the building structured, whereas Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, is more about not just keeping the building standing, but telling the story of Jefferson and learning in tandem about not only the building itself and the location, but also learning more about its owner, Thomas Jefferson. And so that's a little bit about Monticello as a park or a state park. So thank you.